Hello everybody, my name is Jane Clare and I'm the Education Resource Manager for ISQua, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today, Meeting Government or Accreditation Requirements Through the Pursuit of Excellence. Our speaker today is Mr. Brian Johnston, and just to tell you a little bit about Brian before we start, Brian leads a consultancy company specialising in quality and performance in health and social care at both a governance and senior management level. He provides senior counsel to boards and management on government practices, strategic planning, performance monitoring, and has particular expertise in health service accreditation programs, both nationally and internationally. We're delighted to have Brian along to speak with us today, and I'm sure it's going to be a very informative webinar. After the webinar, we're going to ask some questions, and any questions that we can't answer at the end of the webinar, we will try and answer through email after. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Brian now. Thank you. Brian, are you there? If everybody could just hold on a moment, we seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties. We'll be back to you in just a few moments. Hi everybody, this is Jane Clare from ISQua again. I'm terribly sorry about the delay, but we'll just be a few more minutes before we can get started again. Thank you very much for bearing with us.
Okay, now can you hear me, Jane? Okay. I'm just getting out of. Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Brian, I can hear you. You're very welcome today to present the webinar.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
So without further ado, we'll switch over to yourself there.
Slideshow and from the beginning. Okay. Look, I'm sorry about that little hiccup, ladies and gentlemen, but just the difficulties of internet connections and some problems between a PC and a laptop at home. I'm sorry about that. Look, I'm delighted to be with you tonight. It's tonight where I am, maybe a different time of the day, of course, for where you are. And I'm also delighted to have been asked to step in at somewhat short notice to fill in for Mark Brandon, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Aged Care Standards and Accreditation Agency. From the social care perspective, at this interesting topic of meeting government accreditation requirements or the pursuit of excellence. It's mainly from the perspective of a person that, as Mark Brandon is, in his capacity of Chief Executive Officer of the Aged Care Standards and Accreditation Agency, which has as its role the promotion of high quality care in the Australian residential aged care sector. In this country often referred to as nursing homes, and in other countries quite often care homes, particularly in the United Kingdom that I'm aware of, and in other parts of the world as well. We have a few aims that I'd like to just put down at the beginning for what we're focusing on tonight. There'll be a word about accreditation in general, because I think it does warrant a little bit of attention. There'll be some comments about standards, some comments about regulation, some theoretical perspectives if you like, a little bit more in detail about the nature of accreditation in social care in Australia, and then a fairly important discussion dealing with the residents, and then trying to bring our discussion together in terms of compliance with regulations and the pursuit of excellence as joint topics. And of course, as I said, due acknowledgement to Mark Brandon's input and particularly work that was done on behalf of ISQua Special Interest Group with its focus on quality social care for older persons. Accreditation continues to have quite an interesting evolution in Australia. It has for almost 40 years been part of the fabric for the acute, subacute and community health service, and rarely gets the press, although perceived quality failures do, and I'm sure that's common to your experience as well. The last 2 decades in particular have witnessed standards-based accreditation program extend into areas encompassing medical laboratories or pathology laboratories, you might know them as, general practice, junior doctor training and supervision, diagnostic imaging, community care, breast screening services, to name but a few. And increasingly these programs have been government controlled and funded to various degrees. And that's not all that inconsistent with some of the work that many people may be familiar with that Charles Shaw has been doing when he's been attempting to map the changing patterns and nature of accreditation programs around the world. Health sector accreditation schemes in the past tended to be member-based, where participation was voluntary. The industry set the standards, and member-owned accreditation body assessed performance against the standards. The participants in such programs tended to be acute hospitals, which have a high proportion of staff with tertiary level qualifications, patients who have increasingly short stays, and whose health status typically improves as a result of their stay. Reports of maintenance against the standards that were usually made available to the public were at best limited, despite the high level of financial contributions by both direct and indirect means to the acute hospital system, both public and private, by members of the public. So to start with the definition, this is the ISQua definition. There are many variations on this theme that you will no doubt come in contact with, but it says simply it's public recognition by a healthcare accreditation body of the achievement of accreditation standards by a healthcare organisation demonstrated through independent external peer assessment of that organisation's level of performance in relation to the standards. As I said, the intent is there, but it is also, the intent is common, but you'll see several variations on that as you read various parts of the literature. Now, this next slide is something that actually appeals to me greatly because it reflects my own experience, and that is that accreditation is frequently about turning noise into music, and the noise is the clamour of claims for quality activities, sometimes required, sometimes voluntarily undertaken within organisations, and trying to make those fit into the needs of the organisation in terms of assuring the quality of what it does. Sometimes we might well have experienced this sort of situation. There aren't many slides tonight, so these are here for light-hearted relief, if you like, but it also seems apt to me that frequently people could be seen to meet, undertaking quality activities, come out with all sorts of strategies, and then somewhere through the process lost track a little bit of why they were undertaking that work. Why was it important to the organisation? A word about accreditation in terms of what it is and what it is not. It is a commitment to maximising safety and quality. It is about acting in the best interest of service users. It is a commitment to minimising risks and therefore forms part of a risk management strategy for any corporation, and it is about being a learning organisation. But what it's not a guarantee of absolute quality nor of absolute safety. It is about the elimination of, it isn't about the elimination of all risks, because some risks can't be foreseen, and I'll touch on an example of that a little later on. And it's not a guarantee that evidence-based best practice is always provided. And whether you be in social care or the acute care, you will no doubt have found your own examples of that in the past. Clarity of the meaning of standards and their purpose are the linchpin of a robust accreditation scheme. In this context, standards can be a generic term for any performance expectation. Poorly understood or incomplete standards will not contribute to positive outcomes for residents. In fact, they will misguide aged care managers. The basic tenets for drafting standards developed by ISQua are that the standards must address a recognised need, be evidence-based as far as practicable, be developed through a transparent and a consultative process, and be achievable and measurable. There are no points in giving people standards which they can't achieve, and sometimes the reasons for non-achievement can be due to resources, they can also be due to skills, or they can be due to the fact that the standards aren't fit for purpose. In other words, they don't suit the environment in which they are to be used. Most sets of standards and regulations are based on the Donabedian framework, consisting of standards that are either structure, process, or outcome focused. Structural standards infers the existence of structures that enable a process such as suitably qualified personnel and equipment to be available to be in place. Process standards, structures of themselves will not enable quality outcomes. There needs to be processes that are followed. And if you reflect a little on some of the much of the literature that has been published over the last 2 decades about failures in delivery of services, it's often the processes which have been found to be wanting. And outcome standards are, as they would infer, they're very much focused on what has been achieved. To put that in a very practical way, think about the person who is suffering from pain. And if you're wanting to alleviate that pain in a way that's patient-centered, as a little exercise for yourself, possibly after this webinar, see if you can come up with a list of structures and processes that would need to be in place to ensure that the care is person-centered and not simply clinically driven. Moving on now to the next major group I want to talk about, and that's regulation. author by the name of Brennan, writing in the Millbank Quarterly in 1976 about the role of regulation in quality improvement, made this statement: "We regulate in an empirical void, often addressing anecdotes and hysteria with far-reaching initiatives." And again, I suspect that you might be able, from your own experience, to relate to that particular comment. A far more useful approach is that of the regulatory pyramid and the healthcare safety and quality mechanisms that it can underpin. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Wikipedia, the font of all international knowledge, it would seem now, particularly as we see libraries appointing Wikipedia librarians to improve the referencing of its information, says in a definition looking for citations, as I've just commented, that regulation may refer to the following: a process of the promulgation, monitoring and enforcement of laws established by primary and/or delegated legislation. Or it can be a written instrument containing rules having the force of law. So you don't always need an Act of Parliament. It may well be within the purview of a government department to issue instructions which have to be complied to. So put simply, it's something that governments acting under the law can and do apply. They use that strategy. The concepts of regulatory compliance and the pursuit of excellence are not, in my view, and nor in Mark's view, mutually exclusive. Regulatory compliance is not a sinister term. It simply means that one must comply with a set of rules or regulations. Of course, the underlying assumption is that the regulations are fit for purpose, that they reflect the wishes and expectations of the community, and they are achievable. Just to reflect for a moment, for those who may not be aware, on the regulatory pyramid that has been espoused by Professor John Braithwaite and Judith Healy over a number of years now, is exemplified by the model that you see in front of you, where there are different levels of regulation, including self-regulation, which is that middle band. And then if you move up to a higher level of meta-regulation, you can see at the top of that box of information the reference to enforced self-regulation, which is an interesting terminology. But what Braithwaite and others were stating is that there are different types of regulation which can operate in different ways. It's a question of at what level enforced self-regulation, moving on to a command and control environment, needs to be applied by government. And of course, often it's when there have been significant adverse events made known to government which have attracted a great deal of community anxiety and discussion and debate, and they move to take a more proactive line rather than leaving the system to self-regulate, if you like. Well-conceived regulation will provide a framework and the right number of rules necessary to do the job. Of course, poor regulation can be a burden and may drive poor outcomes. The same can be said of accreditation standards. So moving on a little bit to accreditation in social care, external evaluation of aged care services is a relatively recent innovation. In the Australian residential aged care standards, the standards are commonly referred to as expected outcomes. In fact, they are a mixture of structure, process and outcome standards. In reality, the legislation provides for 4 standards covering topics of management system, staffing and organisational development, health and personal care, resident lifestyle, physical environment and safe systems. But within those 4 standards there are 44 expected outcomes, and details of these are accessible on the Aged Care Standards and Accreditation Agency website, and that's what most people tend to refer to as the standards, because compliance with those expected outcomes is one of the requirements for nursing homes or aged residential care facilities in Australia. As I mentioned before, Accreditation has been going through a growth phase in the Australian context for several decades. An external evaluation of aged care services in comparative terms is a fairly recent innovation. It started in the latter part of the last century, in the 1990s. In the Australian residential aged care standards, as I said, we have these 44 outcomes, and that's where operators of nursing homes focus their attention, and is what is subject to audit, a compliance audit by the processes undertaken by the agency. Among external assessing bodies, there's a view that standards can drive performance. Therefore, standards and regulations must be fit for purpose, in that they encompass the range of performance expectations and do not lead to unexpected outcomes. In Australia, the Aged Care Act of 1997 makes it clear that the purpose of accreditation is to promote high quality care and protect the health, safety and well-being of residents. It is also the policy intent of the Parliament that the accreditation exists explicitly for the benefit of residents. The legislation mandates engagement with residents as part of the assessment process by the accreditation agency. When accreditation was introduced to aged care, well over a decade ago now, the industry initially saw it as a major imposition. But the federal government, which provides around 75% of operating funds to care homes in the form of subsidies, wanted a greater degree of accountability and saw accreditation against nationally endorsed standards of practice as a key strategy in shaping performance expectations and strengthening accountability. There are 4 standards, as I've mentioned. You see them there on the screen in front of you. Comments and complaints that were made specifically at the time of its introduction covered such issues as a lack of consistency in interpretation of the requirements, an approach that was too officious by those inspecting facilities, often with no knowledge or no perceived knowledge of aged care and the aged care standards, and that the accreditation agency, and by implication the government, was spying on them. Shock, horror. Over time, with improvements in the capacity to demonstrate consistency, ongoing educational programs, and a stronger emphasis on a partnership approach to quality improvement, these attitudes have changed, but more on this as we progress. The key tools available to the accreditation scheme prescribed by governments in legislation and an industry education program to promote high quality care through the provision of information and training. There's a strong consumer and provider perspective of the accreditation program, as I've already referred to, in relation to the assessment of quality. Although I'd suggest to you that in the current era, this assertion is open to some challenge, and the challenge is in the form of whether or not the engagement with consumers in forming a view about the performance of a home is sufficiently taken into account. It's useful, first of all, to have a shared understanding of what external evaluation is and what it's not. And I've touched on that already in the presentation. Accreditation is one of the forms of external evaluation that exist in the health and aged care sectors around the world. Others include certification against ISO standards and meeting various forms of regulatory requirements, such as the qualifications required to gain a license to operate a business or healthcare facility. That's certainly the case in Australia. Generally, these are forms of risk management and quality assurance schemes that set accessible performance expectations, and in doing so aim to mitigate the risk of a poor outcome for a service user. Accreditation systems are forms of risk management. Quality frameworks or plans can involve a range of activities such as quality assurance, peer review, morbidity and mortality meetings, which collectively aim to mitigate risk of a poor outcome. Accreditation of itself will not stop bad things happening. And an example of that was that in Sydney a couple of years ago, a major fire in a nursing home was a good example. That fire was deliberately lit by an aggrieved staff member and resulted in significant loss of lives, and of course a lot of damage to the property. So no risk management system is going to perfectly be able to avoid those sorts of aberrant events. The Australian Commission on Safety and Quality in Healthcare, in its discussion paper National Safety and Quality Accreditation Standards in 2006, said there are two conditions for accreditation. They are an explicit definition of quality in the form of the standards and an independent review process aimed at identifying the level of congruence between the practices and quality standards. By way of example, general practitioners in Australia seeking to receive practice incentive payments from the government must subject themselves to accreditation against standards developed by the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. The details of these assessments, however, are not available to the public, and public access to the performance information of this type is something that I'll return to further on in this paper. It can be contrasted with residential long-term care for older persons, residents. Residents tend to stay in aged care facilities for extended periods of time. Their health status will generally deteriorate during the stay, and the relative percentage of staff who have tertiary qualifications is low. So the environment for aged care, and I'm sure it's self-evident to you, is so dramatically different from that in the acute care sector. In residential long-term care, participation on an international basis in an external evaluation program is often mandatory for those organisations that wish to provide residential care. In some countries where accreditation is linked to government subsidies, like Australia, it forms part of the quality assurance and oversight framework. In other countries, compliance with care standards is simply a regulatory requirement of government. Failure to comply may lead to enforcement action by the regulator. The reasons for these differences might be tracked to the legal construct of the jurisdictions. The Australian government, for example, cannot legislate for quality of care directly, interestingly enough. However, the promotion of quality is linked to meeting government requirements in order to qualify for subsidies. England, as I understand it, has no such constitutional hurdles. While we refer to some schemes as accreditation, it is more broadly third-party evaluation, where one party, usually government, sets performance expectations, calls standards or regulatory requirements, and another party delivers the services. And the external evaluator, called the accreditation body for the purposes of this discussion, assesses performance against the standards. A simple process. The reports of the external evaluator are made public in respect of the aged residential care program in Australia. Originally it was the full report, but a lot of that information was deemed by people outside of the agency to be unnecessary. So it's a more refined version which is published, but you can see examples of that on the agency's website simply by looking at a particular nursing home and seeing what their last report had to say. The limited published research in this area indicates that accreditation does drive quality improvement to some extent. More study is being undertaken in Australia, for example through the Accredit study with the Australian Institute of Health Improvement at the University of New South Wales, and a paper by Chen, a reference for which is contained elsewhere at the end of this presentation, in 2010 found substantial evidence of significant increased quality improvement activities associated with public reporting in a range of different settings. The lack of research-based evidence has not dissuaded governments from implementing external evaluation schemes in countries such as Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Canada, Denmark, Germany, England, Scotland, United States and the Netherlands. There is continuing interest and ongoing development in the European Union. The schemes mentioned all require long-term care providers to participate or accept the regulation as a condition of being approved to provide services. We know there is interest in developing accreditation as a form of risk mitigation, and quality assurance in quality insurance in Asia because of the requests organisations such as the agency received to brief government representatives and to take part in conferences. The longest established accreditation scheme in Asia is the voluntary scheme conducted by the Hong Kong Association of Gerontology. The third-party evaluation arrangement we have in Australia for residential aged care is not unique to Australia. Increasingly in the high-income countries around the world, there's a growth in external evaluation programs authored by government, and I touched on that previously. A review of the membership of the International Society for Quality in Healthcare's Accreditation Federation reveals that the vast majority of members who are engaged in the evaluation and performance of care homes for older persons have some link to government. Universally, the performance expectations are reflected in standards or regulations prescribed by government, and the evaluating organisation is a government-related activity. Again, some examples include England, Scotland, Ireland, the USA in some states, Netherlands, Germany, and of course Australia. Let's talk for a few moments about residents. Residents are the people best placed to tell us what is happening in the facility in which they live. Obtaining that information, however, has its challenges, particularly for those who have a cognitive impairment. They cannot communicate easily, and those who say they will report for them are often their children, the family or the designated carer. The family of the resident and the person identified as the representative has a well-defined role in aged residential care sector. But can we be confident that the offspring can and will reflect the expectations, feelings and views of their parents accurately? Does the son or daughter reflect their view rather than those of the parent? We certainly see cases where it is, say, a son and a daughter, and both have views on the same topic, but their views can be quite different. On balance, one must question whether relatives are reliable informants concerning the wishes and expectations of parents, who are themselves not able to communicate their wishes. Who are reliable sources, and can more effort be put into understanding the wishes of the resident is an interesting topic in itself, and one currently being explored with some vigour by the agency. The other consideration in obtaining information from a son or a daughter is where it was that person who made the decision to admit their mother, for example, to the institution. The question then is a criticism of the institution a criticism of their earlier selection of the institution? We then need to consider a little more the challenges in obtaining information about aged care from residents. Why would residents be reluctant to criticise the aged care facility? Possibly through fear. They are vulnerable and in the hands of their carers. They're dependent on their carers, who they rely on for physical, emotional, spiritual and emotional needs. They also tend to be, at the moment, part of a generation that has more of a sense of gratitude than entitlement. There is no single or simple response. Cognitive, language or other impairments can inhibit communication, and there are also factors such as culture, social norms, gender, socio-economic factors as contributing dimensions. When we consider the quality of life, we should see it through the eyes of the resident. Relatively little has been researched in the area of quality of life, although some interesting work has been done over recent years by organisations in the United States such as Plaintree, which is well known to many people, but probably less well known, the ISQua program developed at the University of Kent in England. From my perspective, the essential domains of quality of life go well beyond being alive and breathing. In an older person's life, there is much more, and a good system recognises the quality of life aspects that include food, hygiene, privacy, dignity, respect, and the right to take risks and make choices. in developing standards in Australia, we've taken the long view that a person entering an aged care facility does not lose their rights as a citizen. So let's talk about this relationship, or the compliance with regulations, or whether it's the pursuit of excellence, which is the dominant factor. Generally speaking, regulations are themselves a form of performance standard, in that we are required to comply with them or meet them in our daily lives. For example, speed limits on roads. Additionally, the requirement that a driver must drive in a safe manner is set out in most traffic acts or traffic regulations. So similarly to the residential aged care standards, we have attention to be managed. You can drive at 100 kilometres an hour, but a duty of care to others not to drive but have a duty of care to others not to drive in an unsafe manner. Aged care providers have a duty of care, but in the context of the rights of residents to many things, including choice and decision making, a person does not lose their rights as a citizen because they have been admitted to a nursing home. Regulations tend to be a combination of what is required and what is prescribed, what you must do and what you must not do. The key to successful service delivery is actively managing these tensions. We ignore regulation, of course, at our peril, but what role should regulation play in daily management of a nursing home? The regulatory compliance approach to aged care service delivery in Australia is a minimalist approach. The provision of quality care, or a higher order approach in the form of the pursuit of excellence, is more likely to meet the legal requirements and at the same time deliver a standard of services that the community expects for its elders. Some commentators argue that the community does not generally consider aged care until they need it. This can be contrasted with the response of speakers at a conference conducted by the agency several years ago, who were quite clear about their expectations of the sector both now and in the future. And based on those comments, there will be challenges in aligning the expectations with what is possible. Talk for a few minutes about quality. There's no universal definition of quality in healthcare, and certainly none internationally accepted in long-term care for the elderly. Irwin cites that in a publication of his from 2012. Bill Runciman, well known within the ISQua community, defines quality as the extent to which a healthcare service or product produces a desired outcome. And that definition can be extrapolated very comfortably into the social care environment. We can see that while the word quality is a neutral word, it is now commonplace in aged care for commentators, including Runciman, to use it as a positive adjective. Increasingly, a service is described as a quality service, meaning it is good. In internal evaluation, we say we assess the quality of aged care service against performance expectations, which are in fact regulations. Aged care stakeholders tend to talk about the concepts of quality of care and quality of life. In Australia, this may well be because the narrative surrounding the introduction of the Aged Care Act regularly referred to the home-like environment in relation to Australian government subsidised residential care. Residents of nursing homes have a range of needs which go well beyond clinical care, but go very much to life and lifestyle. This construct is reflected in the accreditation standards, which include standards relating to living environment, privacy and dignity, leisure interests and activities, and cultural and spiritual life, alongside standards that encompass medication management, clinical care, and palliative care. There are different views about the relationship between quality of care and quality of life. Some commentators view them as different concepts, while others argue the two overlap, and the degree of overlap depends on the health status of the individual. The latter suggests the more impaired an individual's health, the more likely quality of care is a factor that influences their quality of life. And that point was made in a publication by the then Australian Department of Health and Ageing in 2007. Residents in residential care generally receive care for an extended period of time, and as I've mentioned before, their health tends to decline over that period. The integration of these two concepts of quality of care and quality of life is therefore regarded as being essential in the aged care sector. In contrast, in the acute care sector, where the emphasis is largely placed on healthcare interventions and their safety and outcomes, quality of life is seldom a part of the measurements of quality. It is used, but it's not a part of the structured measurements of quality. While some homes use more sophisticated tools to assess the quality of life of residents, the use of the resident survey as a piece of source information is quite widespread. Those that are most successful seem to be the ones that encourage residents to express their concerns and positive feedback in free-form text, thus ensuring the resident is in a position to have their say, rather than merely respond to what it is the home management wants to know. Could an aged care provider simply define quality and ignore the regulations? Such an approach would be high risk in my view. The number of regulations to which a residential aged care provider is subject is extensive. They are all set by levels of government and in some cases across a number of different departments of state. Let me try to define the quality from using the World Wide Web. Define the term quality. A degree of excellence or worth, a level of excellence or attribute that differentiates, the absence of a defect from the manufacturer, for example, to be at a high degree of excellence, the essential characteristic of good tea from a tea maker, characteristics by which stakeholders judge an organisation. Stakeholders are residents, relatives, the community, government and anyone else who seeks to be. So maybe the characteristics by which stakeholders judge an organisation that is fit for purpose without trying to further define stakeholders and their relative worth or influence is as good a definition as we're going to get. Quality in the aged care context is concerned with achieving positive outcomes for each and every resident that relies on the home for support. There must also be an approach to service delivery in that the outcomes are sustained over time. But of course the challenge is to ensure that the desire for consistency, which is in an underlying business need, does not lead to a stifling where a process is put ahead of outcomes and the institution's convenience ahead of those of residents. But so many of these notions of quality are different things to different people. Moreover, and I think this is a really important issue in the context of aged residential care, an individual's view will change over time. We can consider the newly admitted low care resident who has little or no interest in pain management and a big interest in bus trips. How will I fill in my day? That person will have a personal definition of quality and say, why are you telling me about pain management and palliative care, they might say. 12 months down the track and their health status has declined markedly and advanced cancer has been diagnosed, their expectations and interests will almost certainly have changed. The immediacy of their condition will dictate their view of quality. This construct is consistent with the research about quality and health around the world and reinforces the things we intuitively know. Quality is a multi-dimensional concept and residents are multi-dimensional. But in the end, the community expects aged care homes to deliver resident-focused, high-quality care and services in a home-like environment. That is not their language, but rather the bureaucracies that heralded the introduction of the Aged Care Act. I think people are much simpler in their approach. They just want to have the best life they can, and they will measure that in whatever way they want. On balance, I believe residents are typically more inclined to form their own view of their experience in the home than rely on the views of an accreditation assessor. So we know there is a challenge to deliver quality services when each player has a view as to what constitutes quality, and the government also has a view. In the broader context of quality, we must not lose sight of the point that a person's perceptions of quality is founded on their experiences of life and the expectations that emerge from those. The agency has anecdotes of people who complained when the accreditation of the home in which they resided was revoked because they were happy with the care, but some time after relocation came to the realisation that the care of the previous home was not up to standard. We seek to measure quality absolutely, but there are some cautionary thoughts and questions. Can we actually assign a rating? There are differing views as to what constitutes quality. We need to be cautious in how we set quality measures or indicators, because standards and measures do drive performance. We need to ensure they are comprehensive without becoming an end in themselves. But be aware what gets measured gets done. Focus on simply counting falls might have unintended consequences. Chemical and physical restraint will reduce the number of falls. However, there are obvious negative consequences with such an approach. We tend to see indicators as numbers only. However, in our daily lives, we use instinctive or observational indicators all the time. We notice changes in the weather, and they cause us to take action. You do not need to know the temperature to know to put on a coat. The use of these types of observational techniques cannot be understated in long-term care. The care worker who simply observes a resident's change in demeanour and acts on that is gold. We should also question the utility of institutional scores. They do provide some commentary about how the home is performing against the government standards, but do they have meaning for residents? Not if you are in the minority of 2% who had an adverse event that could have been avoided or are unhappy with other aspects of their treatment or care. Indicators, observation and monitoring are also useless unless they translate into action for individuals. To be effective, indicators must be a comprehensive set and viewed in much the same way as you would a balanced scorecard. This brings me now to the notion of excellence. These are Mark Brandon's words, I should say. He thinks that excellence is the holy grail in service delivery in any industry. I like the metaphor. Similarly, like many words, it has many meanings. And again, the web turns up lots of meanings, such as quality in excelling, possessing good qualities in high degrees, the state or quality of excelling, and the quality of being excellent. You can find all of those terms if you look. So I want to spend a little bit of time extending that discussion into the pursuit of excellence. And in doing so, I'll take some thoughts from some comments made by the Chief Justice of Queensland, who in a speech a number of years ago now entitled The Pursuit of Excellence at the University of Queensland Commencement Service encapsulated the notion of the pursuit of excellence extremely well when he said, "The pursuit of excellence is a quest without end. As with wisdom or humility, we should never rightly see ourselves or our organisation as truly excellent, although we may note such a quality in others. So, in pursuit of excellence means we want to demonstrate the quality of being exceptional. But is it possible? Maybe the linking of pursuit, that is to chase with no obvious reference to catching, is not so out of line or defeatist as one might have first thought or implied from that quotation. Could I suggest that if you had an objective to provide excellent service, that objective is self-limiting? You might simply decide you were providing excellent service, stop trying to improve and stay put. We cannot ignore that many corporate mission and vision statements include such a phrase. Maybe they are more marketing and promotional statements than a reflection of approach or vision or what the intended culture or desired culture of that organisation should be. True excellence requires more than skill, ability, intellect, effort and accomplishment. All those qualities are without value if they exist in a moral or ethical vacuum. This is particularly true in aged care. It may be no accident that mission-based organisations manage a large percent of residential aged care bodies in Australia. In fact, history is littered with brilliant figures who might have been considered to embody excellence had they only used their talents for good. Being very, very good at something, otherwise described as technically sound, can only be considered heading to excellence if it is in the right context or in the context of right. Excellence in aged care does encompass more than the document, systems and processes. It's about people and pursuit of the benefit for others. In aged care, it is the residents that are the ultimate judges, and it is against their standards, their values and what they rate as important that they judge the people and organisations that provide services. I also suspect that residents place greater credence on their own assessments than they do on those of government inspectors and accreditation assessors. However, the absence of a true market and the practical incapacity of a resident to relocate means they are more a customer who may choose to go elsewhere. This very feature justifies the involvement of government in the setting of standards and creating a quality assurance scheme for accreditation. So should we just leave it to residents to decide whether the quality of care and services is appropriate? I must say I don't think any government or community agreeing to that proposition when we are talking about the frail, the vulnerable, the elderly and the disempowered in our society. The scope of services that are provided to support a resident ranges from those that are clinical in their nature to those that directly contribute to lifestyle. So now let's try and bring all of this together. This relationship between regulation, quality and excellence. So regulations are usually expressed in the law. It's the rules of the game and they're set by a third party. Quality is something we try to measure in many ways, and excellence is something we pursue with a full and complete understanding that if we ever feel we have attained the status of excellence, we've not. So, should aged care providers be focusing on regulations, quality indicators and accreditation systems when they are developing their own programs and recruiting and training staff, or should they be building systems to meet people's ever-changing needs and wants, then deciding how to measure them? Do they behave in accordance with the intention and spirit or letter of the law? This is in the context that well-framed regulations will not impede innovation and delivery of quality services. Among accrediting bodies, the question concerning the level of prescription that should exist in standards is vexed. It's true, there is a range of views concerning the detail. The agency experience is that there's no unity of view amongst aged care managers. Some expect extensive guidance concerning the expectations that underlay the expected outcomes under the accreditation standards. Others suggest that the headline will suffice. They'll get on with it and do it their way. My own view is that the more detailed the standard, the less arguments there will be within accredited assessors for sure. However, there is more than counterbalanced by another view that detailed standards can and in fact often do stifle innovation and straitjacket service delivery. I think that if one has an eye only for the letter of the law and is managing only to comply with the regulations, then one risks missing the opportunities the broader approach of an eye for the spirit offers. From my perspective, using the letter of the law to get out of trouble with the authorities is probably not a bad call, but we should not look to regulations as lighting the way to delivering high quality services. It's acknowledged that many people in aged care deliberately flout the many rules and regulations. I think that's what happens in most cases, particularly where the level of failing to meet standards is low. In so much as the journey, their quality journey, which has resulted in failing to meet the standards, has only been moving at a rate little faster than a glacier, and it's only noticed as a problem when it tips over the edge. This can be prevented by good information management systems. The recent history from the Accreditation Agency demonstrates that failing to meet the standards related to having effective information systems in place is amongst the highest reason for that outcome. However, having said that, there is little one can do to eliminate the fact that a staff member will have a bad day once in a while. That happens in all organisations. Most are more forgiving than aged care. Notwithstanding any of that, compliance with regulations is something with which we are all bound. This can also be quite complex for people responsible for governance in your organisation. While the business of aged care is inherently risky, as are other businesses, the risks are exacerbated by the type of service, nature of the clientele, and work organisation structures where one or two people direct the traffic in the home. And compare that to most acute care facilities. So what are the risks if an Australian aged care provider is found not to meet the minimum requirements? The most immediate risk is a visit from the regulator, the Department now of Social Services, that has recently been given responsibility for aged care. Outcomes following that visit can include it is confirmed that residents' health, safety and well-being has been put at risk and is therefore compromised. Commonwealth government subsidies can cease or be reduced. Other revenue and support may wane. Increased costs can be incurred associated with mitigation and repair. The organisation's reputation can be damaged, thus affecting the capacity to recruit staff. Staff morale itself sags. The career reputation of management is damaged and the organisation becomes risk-averse, and being risk-averse is a significant risk in itself in many occasions. I must also ask you to consider the risk of achieving excellence if on achieving the minimum required by law to obtain subsidies, you simply stop and rest on your achievement. The accreditation standards reflect what the Parliament believes align with the expectations of residents and their families, overlaid with a view of community expectations, a notion of good practice and the cloak of the state knows best. The current review of the standards is an important piece of work because it creates an opportunity to reflect the vast increase in knowledge about residential aged care services delivery over the past 12 years and changes in industry practices. The other challenge is to meet the diversity of quality between providers. The challenge in setting standards is to go far enough but not too far such that the level of detail ends up prescribing processes and structures rather than requiring the existence of processes and structures that support the services and the outcomes for residents. I also think we need to remember that generally regulations tend to be directed at the protection of the community, and thereby the focus in their application is on the lower group or those perceived to be poor achievers. And think about that statement in the context of Braithwaite's regulatory pyramid. I think it is true that the overall quality of residential care in Australia has improved since the introduction of accreditation in 1997. Many commentators suggest it is superior to that generally available in other countries. It has been suggested that because of this improvement, it is time to relax the regulatory framework related to quality. Such an approach represents a risk to residents because at this time we cannot say that the reason for quality has improved is not directly attributable to the existence of the quality framework. In aged care, we aim for protection of health, safety and well-being and the promotion of quality. Many other countries are more focused on protection. This approach assumes physical safety and protection is more relevant than the broad range we consider in the Australian context. It does beg the question as to whether the accreditation standards are performance or quality indicators. I think they are at best a proxy for measuring quality, in the absence of anything else. That is why standards must be fit for purpose. At the same time, an accreditation program can be characterised as a risk mitigation strategy, which we've referred to before, and one which provides some assurance or comfort to the community. The other thing I would add is that accreditation standards compliance scores tend to be institution scores. As a concept, excellence in service is not about aggregating and saying, well, 95% of people are happy, ain't that grand? Excellence is about 100% and the experience of each individual who would volunteer to be in the 5% of the unhappy group. The accreditation standards are not a management system. In their pure form, they are a measure of the effectiveness of those systems, and it concerns me when I read that some providers use the standards as a management system. How does one position for excellence? That's a huge topic.
Sorry, Brian, just to interrupt there. We're running slightly over on time.
And I'm about 1 minute away from finishing.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you, Brian.
Is that okay?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. So do you want to strive to provide high quality and chase excellence, or do you want to just be accredited with no detected failure to meet an expected outcome? In any event, does full compliance with accreditation standards at your home mean for each individual? What does it mean for each individual resident? You say you've got accredited, or do you say we deliver high quality care? These questions are ones to be asked of yourself and not necessarily for public consumption. Full compliance with accreditation standards says you passed the exam. At that point in time, the elusive excellence of service is approached when the services are delivered consistently at a high level and in a moral and ethical framework. Final analysis, do you want to just get a tick from the accreditation body, or do you want the satisfaction of knowing that you are providing near excellent service? Thank you. Back to you, Jane.
Super. Listen, thank you so much, Brian.
I'm sorry about that. It's a little bit rushed with the late start.
Not at all, not at all. We were delighted to have you along today, and we have two questions. The first one is, what is the predominant type of accreditation in Australia?
Okay, the predominant type is a standards-based assessment that is conducted by people who are regarded as peers by the people who are being assessed. Now, that applies in many forms of accreditation programs, in hospital system, in general practice, in aged residential care. Not everyone has to be a healthcare professional, but they are expected to be people who are knowledgeable in that area or in a particularly significant component of that area. So the most common type is a standards-based assessment program where the evaluation is undertaken by peers.
Super. That's fantastic, Brian. The last question we have is, if accreditation does not guarantee absolute quality, then why bother ourselves? Wouldn't it be appropriate then for healthcare organisations to invest monies meant for accreditation into other areas for quality improvement in their organisations?
Well, the investment in accreditation hopefully is not the sum total of the investment in quality by any organisation. The investment in accreditation is a very small component of what any organisation in health and social care should be allocating to ensuring that it provides maximum quality of the sort described in this paper and minimises their risks. So if you see, as I do, that accreditation forms part of a broader risk management strategy for a risk management program for an organisation, the value accreditation brings is that it is the views of others looking at your organisation, an external assessment, if you like, with a degree of expertise who can verify or comment otherwise as to the degree to which you are meeting the standards. And I think that's one of its great strengths.
Great, thank you very much, Brian.
Okay.
Super, so there are the questions for the moment. I'd like to thank you very much, Brian, for that presentation.
Thank you.
If any of the participants have any other questions or afterthoughts, please feel free to email them in to me. I'd like to thank all of the participants for staying with us despite the delay at the start. Apologies again for that. And I'd just like to wrap up there just to say that there will be some questions in the fellowship forum for participants afterwards. Lovely.
Okay. Thanks very much, Jane.
Thank you very much, Brian. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.